The Diplomat's Garden. The observation deck of Nexus Prime Station offered a view of 12 different star systems. Princess Aelyria stood before the massive viewport, her 7-foot frame casting a shadow across the polished floor. Her skin shimmered with the pale silver characteristic of Crethosian royalty, and the neural crown atop her head pulsed softly with bioluminescent light. She was a warrior born, trained since childhood in the ancient combat arts of her people, and she had never felt more trapped. Behind her, the diplomatic reception continued. Representatives from 40 species mingled, negotiated, and postured. The air hummed with translated conversations in dozens of languages. Somewhere in that crowd was the human she was supposed to marry. A political arrangement, her father had explained. The Crethosian Empire needed Earth's agricultural technology and their position near the galactic core. Earth wanted protection and trade routes. A marriage would seal the alliance. Aelyria had seen his file. David Chen, age 34, botanist and cultural liaison. The photograph showed a man of average human height with dark hair graying at the temples and kind eyes behind simple glasses. He looked utterly unremarkable. Her warrior heart rebelled at the thought of binding herself to someone so ordinary. The stars are beautiful from here, aren't they? She turned to find him standing beside her. Up close, he was smaller than she expected, barely reaching her shoulder. He wore simple clothes, a dark jacket over a white shirt, completely plain compared to the elaborate uniforms and formal wear of other diplomats. In his hands, he held a small potted plant with delicate purple flowers. "You are David Chen," she said, her voice carrying the harmonic undertones of her people. "I am, and you must be Princess Aelyria." He smiled, a gentle expression that reached his eyes. "I brought you something. These are lavender plants from Earth. They're hardy, adaptable, and they smell wonderful when you crush the leaves gently." Aelyria stared at the plant, then at him. Every other suitor had brought weapons, Jan Lipin from battles or grand declarations. He brought her a flower in a pot. "I do not garden," she said stiffly. "Neither did I, until I learned that growing things teaches patience better than anything else." He set the pot on a nearby table. "My grandmother always said that anyone who can nurture life can also protect it. The two skills are not as different as people think." Something in his words made her look at him more carefully. His hands were steady, his posture relaxed but somehow centered. The way he moved had an economy to it, no wasted motion, and his eyes, when they met hers, held depths she had not expected. "The Council expects us to marry within the month," Aelyria said. "To seal the alliance between our peoples. I know, and I understand if you find the arrangement distasteful. Humans have not exactly made a strong impression on the galactic stage. We're young, relatively weak, and we don't have impressive technology or grand fleets." He paused. "But we survive. And we learn, and we try to leave things better than we found them. My people are warriors," Aelyria said. "We value strength, courage, and honor in battle. What can a botanist offer a warrior princess?" David smiled again, but this time there was something else in his expression, something she could not quite name. Perspective, perhaps. "I've learned that there are many kinds of strength. The oak tree stands tall and proud, but it's the bamboo that bends in the storm and survives." Over the following days, Aelyria found herself seeking out David's company despite her reservations. He spent his mornings in the station's botanical gardens, a place most diplomats ignored. She would find him there, hands deep in soil, talking to the plants as if they could understand him. "Do you really believe they listen?" she asked one morning. "Plants respond to vibrations, to care, to attention," he said, gently transplanting seedlings. "Maybe that's their way of listening. Everything alive wants to grow, wants to reach toward light. Our job is just to give them what they need." She watched him work, noting the care he took with each fragile stem, the gentleness of his touch. Yet his hands bore calluses, the kind that came from hard work or perhaps something else. There were scars, too, faint white lines on his forearms that disappeared under his sleeves. "You have scars," she observed. "How does a botanist get scars like those?" David paused, his hands stilling in the soil. For just a moment something flickered across his face, something old and painful. Then it was gone, replaced by his usual calm expression. "Everyone has scars, Princess. Some are just more visible than others." The wedding took place in the Grand Hall of Nexus Prime, witnessed by representatives from across the galaxy. Aelyria wore the ceremonial armor of her house, silver and purple, marked with the achievements of her ancestors. David wore a simple suit, black with a white shirt and a small lavender flower pinned to his lapel. When the officiant asked if they accepted this union, Scylla hesitated. She looked at David, this strange, gentle human who grew plants and spoke in metaphors. He met her gaze steadily, and in that moment she saw something that made her breath catch. Behind the kindness in his eyes was steel. Behind the gentleness was something hard and unbreakable. "I accept," she said. "I accept," David echoed. As they sealed the marriage with the traditional exchange of gifts, David presented her with a seed pod. "This is from an earth tree called a sequoia. They live for thousands of years. Plant it somewhere you want to put down roots and it will outlive us both." Scylla gave him a neural crystal, a piece of Crethosian technology that would allow him to touch the edges of their telepathic network. "So you can hear my thoughts when I choose to share them," she said. That night, as the celebration continued without them, they stood together in the gardens. David was quiet, staring at the stars with an expression she was beginning to recognize. Not peace, but watchfulness. "You are not what you seem," she said finally. He turned to her, and in the dim light, his face looked older, harder. "None of us are, Princess. We all wear masks. The question is whether we wear them to deceive or to protect. Which is yours?" "Both," he said honestly. "I am exactly who I appear to be. I love plants. I believe in peace. I think there are better solutions than war." He paused. "But I also know that sometimes peace requires guardians. Sometimes gardeners must also be guards." Before she could question him further, his communicator chimed softly. He glanced at it and his expression shifted, becoming sharp and focused. "What is it?" Scylla asked. "Nothing urgent. Just a message from home." But the way he said it, carefully neutral, told her it was anything but nothing. That night, Scylla lay awake in their quarters, aware of David sitting by the window. In the neural crystal's faint glow, she could sense his thoughts, not the words, but the shape of them. He was thinking of Earth, of something left behind, of duties that had no end. And underneath it all was a river of sadness, old and deep, the kind that came from losing something that could never be replaced. She reached out with her mind, a gentle telepathic touch. David started slightly, then relaxed. "Sorry," she sent. "I did not mean to intrude." "You're not intruding," he replied, his thoughts carrying warmth. "We're married now. My thoughts are yours if you want them." "Are they?" she asked. "Or are there rooms in your mind you keep locked?" He was quiet for a long moment. "Everyone has locked rooms, Scylla. But I promise you this, I will never lie to you. And if the day comes when those doors need to open, I will open them." Somewhere in the deep dark between stars, something ancient stirred. Sensor networks at the edge of known space began registering anomalies. Ships disappeared without distress calls. Colonies went silent. And in classified briefings across a dozen worlds, analysts began using a word that had not been spoken in millennia: architects. But in the gardens of Nexus Prime, a warrior princess and a botanist began building something neither of them expected. Not just an alliance, but understanding. Not just a marriage of convenience, but the first threads of something real. David tended his plants with the same care he brought to every conversation with Scylla. She began to see that his gentleness was not weakness, but choice, deliberate and conscious. He could have been harsh or demanding. Instead, he chose patience. "Why did you agree to this?" she asked him one evening. "You could have refused. Your people did not force you." "No, they didn't," David agreed. He was pruning a small tree, his movements precise and practiced. "I agreed because I believe in building bridges. Because I've seen what happens when species fail to understand each other. And because," he paused, considering his words, "because I was ready to try growing something again." "You speak as if you stopped growing things." "I did for a while." His hands stilled on the branches. "There was a time when I focused on other work. Necessary work, but not the kind that creates life. When I came back to botany, I had to relearn how to be gentle." Scylla watched him, this puzzle of a man who spoke in riddles and kept secrets behind kind eyes. She was beginning to understand that David Chen was like his beloved plants. There was more happening beneath the surface than anyone could see. Roots went deep, and some seeds only sprouted when conditions were right. She did not know that soon, very soon, those conditions would arrive. And when they did, her gentle husband would transform into something the galaxy had not seen in centuries. A gardener who remembered how to wage war, a peaceful man who had never forgotten how to survive. For now, though, they had these quiet moments, learning each other's rhythms, building trust one conversation at a time, planting seeds that would either grow into something beautiful or wither in the coming storm. The future was approaching faster than anyone knew. But in the garden, for just a little while longer, there was peace. When shadows gather, 3 years of marriage had changed things in ways Zylara never expected. The Krythosian homeworld of Kyrix Prime, with its purple skies and crystalline cities, had become home not just to her but to David as well. He had transformed a section of the royal palace into gardens that drew visitors from across the planet. Krythosians who had scorned the weak human now sought his advice on cultivation, on patience, on the strange earth philosophy he called working with nature instead of against it. But Zylara knew her husband better now. She had learned to read the subtle signs that others missed. The way his hands would still sometimes mid-task when certain news reports played, how he would wake in the night and stand at their window, staring at stars with an expression that had nothing to do with botanical contemplation, the coded messages that arrived from Earth with increasing frequency, marked with classifications she was not supposed to notice. She loved him. That was the surprise. Somewhere between his patient lessons about soil composition and his terrible attempts to learn Krythosian combat forms, she had fallen completely in love with David Chen. He made her laugh. He listened to her fears about living up to her warrior legacy. He held her when the pressure of being crown princess became too much, and he had never lied to her. But there were truths he had not yet spoken. The first colony went dark on a Tuesday. Outer Rim, 3 light-years from Krythosian space. The garrison reported strange readings, then nothing. When the investigation fleet arrived, they found the planet stripped clean. No buildings, no bodies, no evidence anything had ever lived there. Just bare rock and silence. Scavengers, Zylara's brother Tharn declared in the council chamber. He was everything a Krythosian warrior should be. Tall, powerful, aggressive. Pirates with new technology. We'll hunt them down. No, David said quietly from his usual place at the back of the room. He rarely spoke in military councils, and his interruption made everyone turn. Not scavengers. And what would a gardener know about military threats? Tharn sneered. David stood, and Zylara noticed how his posture had changed. The gentle slouch was gone, replaced by something straighter, harder. I know that pirates take valuable things and leave the rest. This is different. This is consumption. Explain, Zylara's father, Emperor Kryn, commanded. The old warrior's eyes were sharp with interest. The pattern matches historical records from Earth archives. 800 years ago, humanity encountered something similar. We called them the architects. They consume everything, break it down to base elements, and use it to build more of themselves. David pulled out a data tablet, and Zylara realized with a shock that it was military grade, encrypted with codes far above his supposed clearance level. They're a hive mind species that awakens every few millennia, strips several galaxies clean, then goes dormant again. The council chamber erupted in questions and protests. David stood calmly in the center of the storm, and Zylara saw clearly for the first time what she had been sensing for 3 years. This was not the face of a botanist caught in over his head. This was the face of someone who had been expecting this moment, preparing for it. How does Earth have records of something from 800 years ago? General Vex demanded. Your species barely had spaceflight 2 centuries ago. David met the general's gaze steadily. That's what we let the galaxy believe. The truth is more complicated. Are you saying humans lied about your history? Tharn rose from his seat, hands moving toward weapons. I'm saying we told the truth, just not all of it. David tapped his tablet, and new images filled the council chamber's displays. Ships unlike any Zylara had seen, sleek and dark, appearing in orbit around Kyrix Prime. The Silent Watcher's fleet arrived in system 2 hours ago. They've been waiting at the edge of your detection range for my signal. The temperature in the room dropped. 12 massive vessels hung in space, their hulls absorbing light, making them look like holes cut in the fabric of reality. As Zylara watched, they began broadcasting human military identification codes that predated first contact by 500 years. What have you brought to our world? Emperor Kryn's voice was deadly quiet. Protection, David said simply, and truth. 800 years ago, the architects nearly wiped out humanity. We survived by becoming something we're not proud of. We militarized our entire species. We built weapons that violated every principle we held sacred. And when it was over, when we'd driven them back into dormancy, we made a choice. He looked directly at Xylara as he continued, and she saw pain in his eyes. We decided that the galaxy didn't need to know what we'd become, so we hid our fleets, erased our military history, and sent out peaceful explorers to make first contact. We pretended to be young and naive. And we watched. We've been watching for 800 years, waiting for the architects to wake up again. And I was what? Xylara heard her voice crack. An assignment? A way to embed a spy in the Krithosian royal family? You were supposed to be, David admitted, and the honesty hurt worse than a lie. Commander Martinez proposed the marriage alliance for exactly that reason. Earth needed eyes in the major empires, people in position to coordinate defense when the architects returned. He crossed the chamber to stand before her, ignoring the dozen warriors whose hands had moved to weapons. But that's not what you became. Xylara, I fell in love with you. That was never part of the plan. That was never supposed to happen. And now I'm standing here trying to save your world while knowing you'll probably hate me forever. I don't, she started, but alarms cut her off. Admiral Kess burst into the chamber, her neural crown blazing with distress. 2 more colonies gone.
And we're detecting massive spatial distortions at the galactic rim.
Something huge is coming through. David's communicator chimed. He answered in rapid English, his voice carrying an authority Xylara had never heard. The words were clipped military. Nothing like his usual gentle cadence. When he finished, his face was grim. The main swarm is ahead of schedule. They'll be here in 72 hours instead of the projected week. How do you fight them? Emperor Kryn demanded. Very carefully. David moved to the display and his fingers danced across controls with practiced ease. The architects adapt to any weapon used against them. Energy weapons, kinetic weapons, nuclear weapons. After the first encounter, they evolve defenses. Conventional warfare is suicide. Then how did humans survive? General Vex asked. David was quiet for a long moment. We didn't fight them with weapons. We fought them with biology. The architects consume and incorporate organic and inorganic matter, but they can't distinguish between food and poison. We created retroviruses, prion diseases, corrupted genetic material. We turned ourselves into a bioweapon. The horror of his words settled over the chamber. Tharn spoke first, his voice shaking with disgust. You infected your own people. Volunteers, David corrected. People who knew they were going to die anyway. They let themselves be taken, and the diseases spread through the hive mind. It was defective and monstrous, and it cost us half our species before we won. Xylara felt sick. She had married a man who had participated in, what, genocide? Biological warfare on a scale that defied comprehension? I was 14 when the architects came to Sol System, David said quietly. I watched them consume Mars in 3 days. I saw them take the orbital stations where my parents worked. By the time I was 20, I was commanding biowarfare teams, creating diseases that could think and adapt. By 30, I'd killed more beings than your entire military has in its history. He looked at his hands, these gentle hands that had taught her to plant seeds. When it was over, when we'd finally driven them into dormancy, I couldn't touch anything living. Everything I'd touched had died. So they retired me, told me to find something else to do, learn to create instead of destroy. The gardens, Xylara whispered. The gardens, he confirmed. For 4 years I learned to grow things again, to nurture instead of kill, to be gentle. And I thought maybe I could be that person permanently. Maybe David Chen the botanist was real, and Commander David Chen could stay buried. The lights in the council chamber flickered as another alarm sounded. This time, the display showed live footage from the outer rim. A ship, massive beyond comprehension, emerging from a spatial rift. Its hull pulsed with sickly bioluminescence, organic and mechanical, fused into something that hurt to look at. That's a scout, David said. The main fleet is 50 times that size. Emperor Kryn stood, his full height imposing even by Krithosian standards. What do you need from us? Everything, David said. Every ship, every warrior, every resource you have. And you need to trust me even though I've given you no reason to. He looked at Xylara. Especially you. She stood slowly, her mind racing. Everything she thought she knew was a lie. But no, not everything. The way he'd held her when she cried about her mother's death. The patience he'd shown teaching her to appreciate small growing things. The love in his eyes every morning. Those were real. She knew they were real. "I need to think," she said. "We don't have time," David started. "Then make time." Her voice carried the harmonic power of Krathosian authority, making the walls vibrate. "You kept this from me for 3 years. You can give me 3 hours." She strode from the chamber, her personal guard falling in behind her. But not before she saw the look on David's face, the crushing guilt and desperate hope warring there. Part of her wanted to comfort him. Part of her wanted to strike him. All of her was terrified. In their quarters, she found his hidden room. The neural crystal he wore allowed her to sense the concealed door, keyed to biometrics she'd never thought to question. Inside, she found the truth of David Chen. Weapons lined one wall, not ceremonial but practical, well-maintained and ready for use. A sword hung in place of honor, its blade marked with characters she recognized as human Mandarin. Awards and commendations filled another wall, all classified, all dated from 8 centuries ago under different names. Identity documents showing David's face, but with different identities, different ranks, different lives. And journals. Hundreds of journals handwritten in careful script. She opened one at random. Day 847 of the campaign. Lost another team today. Wilkins, Sarah, and young Tommy, just 19 years old. They volunteered for the infection protocol. I held Tommy's hand while the virus took hold, rewrote his genetic code, turned him into a weapon. He asked me if it would hurt. I told him no, I lied. His screams will join the others in my dreams. But we saved the Europa colony. 3 million people live because Tommy died. Does that balance? Can it ever balance? She read more, page after page of pain, duty, and grinding sacrifice. The man who wrote these had been breaking apart piece by piece, held together only by necessity. And then, near the end of the most recent journal, she found her name. Zylara makes me laugh. I'd forgotten how. She's teaching me that strength and gentleness aren't opposites, that warriors can also be kind. I don't deserve her, but I'm selfish enough to want to keep her anyway. If the architects never come, if I can have this life with her, I'll die grateful. But I know they'll come. I've always known, and when they do, she'll see what I really am, and I'll lose her. Some prices you pay in advance, and some you pay forever. The journal shook in her hands. This man, this complicated, broken, beautiful man, had been trying to protect her from his own past, trying to give her the gentle version of himself because that was what he thought she deserved. She returned to the council chamber to find organized chaos. David was at the center, coordinating with both Krathosian commanders and the newly arrived human fleet. His voice was crisp, professional, every inch the military commander he'd claimed to be. When he saw her, he paused mid-sentence. "Princess Zylara." "Commander Chen," she interrupted, using his real rank for the first time. The flinch that crossed his face was subtle but visible. "I have a question. When you taught me to garden, was that part of your cover?" He looked genuinely confused. "No, that was me trying to remember how to be human." "Why?" "Because the man who wrote about soil pH and companion planting is the same man who designed bioweapons. You're not two different people, David. You're one person who contains multitudes." She stepped closer. "You were right that I'd be angry. I am angry. You lied by omission for 3 years, but you were wrong that I'd hate you. Zylara, I'm not finished." She placed her hand over his heart, feeling it race beneath her palm. "You think your past makes you a monster. Maybe it does. Maybe we're all monsters when survival is on the line. But you're also the man who cries when seedlings die, who spent 6 months learning my language just so you could tell me poetry in my own tongue, who holds me like I'm precious." "You are precious," he said softly. "Then trust me with the truth. All of it. Trust me to stand beside you, not behind you. I am a warrior of the Krathosian Empire. We don't hide from darkness. We walk into it with weapons drawn." She felt tears on her face and didn't wipe them away. "So tell me, husband, how do we save my people?" The relief in his eyes was painful to witness. "Together," he said. "We do it together." And there, in a council chamber preparing for war, surrounded by warriors and weapons, a gardener and a princess sealed a different kind of alliance. Not political, not strategic, but something far more dangerous. Two people choosing to face the darkness side by side, knowing it might destroy them but refusing to face it alone. The architects were coming. In 67 hours they would reach Kyrix Prime. And in that time, David Chen would have to become Commander Chen again, the man who had saved humanity by becoming its nightmare. But now he wouldn't do it alone. Scilara had seen the man behind the mask, and she had chosen him anyway. Sometimes love meant accepting that gardens grew in soil fertilized by old battles. Sometimes the same hands that wielded swords could also plant seeds. They would face what came together, and the galaxy would learn why humans whispered the name Commander Chen with reverence and terror, why they'd hidden their history, and why peace-loving gardeners were sometimes the most dangerous warriors of all, because they knew exactly what they were capable of. And they'd chosen mercy anyway, until mercy was no longer an option. The gardener's blade, the war room of Kyrix Prime, hummed with controlled chaos. Holographic displays showed the architect's approach from multiple angles, each update more dire than the last. The world ship was beyond anything Scilara had imagined. A living mass the size of a moon, pulsing with bioluminescent veins, surrounded by thousands of smaller craft that fed off it like parasites off a host. David stood at the central display, transformed. Gone was the gentle slouch, the hesitant gestures, the careful politeness. Commander Chen spoke in clipped sentences, issued orders that experienced generals followed without question, and reorganized the entire Krythosian defense fleet in under 2 hours. "Your traditional formation is suicide," he told Admiral Kess bluntly. "The architects will analyze your tactics within minutes and adapt. We need asymmetric warfare, unpredictable patterns, ships that behave erratically, break every rule of engagement you know." "Our warriors fight with honor," Tharn protested. "We don't engage in deception." David turned to him with eyes like ice. "Your warriors will fight with survival. Honor is for peacetime. This is extinction." He pulled up footage from Earth's archives, images that made even hardened Krythosian soldiers look away. "This is what happens when you fight honorably against the architects. They respect nothing but efficiency. They feel nothing but hunger, and they turn your fallen warriors into more of themselves." The silence that followed was profound. Then Emperor Kryn spoke. "Tell us what to do, Commander." For the next 48 hours, David transformed the Krythosian military. He divided the fleet into small independent cells with no predictable command structure. He taught Krythosian warriors to fight dirty, to retreat strategically, to value survival over glory. And he coordinated with the Silent Watchers fleet, preparing the biological warfare protocols that had saved humanity 8 centuries ago. Scilara watched him work, seeing the toll it took. Each order, each strategic sacrifice, each life he calculated as acceptable loss carved new lines into his face. During brief rest periods, she would find him in their quarters, staring at his hands. "I thought I was done with this," he said once. "I thought David the gardener could be real." "He is real," Scilara insisted. "This is also you." "Both are real. When this is over, if we survive, will you still be able to look at me?" She took his face in her hands, forcing him to meet her eyes. "I looked into your hidden room. I read your journals, David, all of them. I know what you did, what it cost you, what you carry every day. And yes, I will still look at you. I will always look at you." The first wave hit 37 hours after David's arrival. Architect fighters, nightmarish blends of insect and machine, swarmed into Krythosian space. The battle was chaos. Ships exploded, warriors died, and for every architect fighter destroyed, 2 more seemed to take its place. But David's tactics worked. The unpredictable patterns confused the architect's adaptation algorithms. Ships would attack, retreat, then attack from impossible angles. Krythosian warriors, trained for honorable combat, learned to ambush and flee. It went against everything they believed, but it kept them alive. "They're learning," David reported, watching the tactical displays. "We have maybe 6 more hours before they adapt to our patterns. Then we move to Phase 2. Phase 2 was biological warfare. The Silent Watchers began seeding space with microscopic agents, viruses designed to corrupt architect biology. Ships that survived encounters were deliberately infected before retreating, spreading the disease back to the world ship. It was working. The architect advance slowed. Their coordination fractured. Individual fighters began exhibiting erratic behavior as the viruses disrupted their hive-mind connection. But it wasn't enough. The world ship itself was too massive, too complex. The biological agents that worked on the fighters couldn't penetrate the world ship's defenses. And every hour, the architects adapted a little more, evolved better countermeasures. "We need to hit the core." David announced in the command center. Deliver the full payload directly to the world ship's central intelligence. That's suicide, General Vex stated flatly. Nothing can penetrate that deep. Something can. David pulled up schematics of a small, fast ship. I designed these for Sol defense. Single pilot craft, minimal crew, maximum speed. One-way trip. The pilot delivers the payload, then he didn't finish. Absolutely not, Xylara said immediately. You are not sacrificing yourself. It's what I do, David replied quietly. I'm good at it. Then I'm going with you. Xylara, no. Her neural crown blazed with determination. You said we do this together. That means both of us go, or neither of us goes. They argued for 10 minutes while the architects pressed closer. Finally, Emperor Kryn settled it. My daughter goes, and she takes a full strike team. If you're doing this, you do it with the best warriors Kyrix Prime can offer. 20 minutes later, Xylara stood in the launch bay beside David and 10 elite Krathosian commandos. The ship was cramped, armed with weapons from both civilizations and equipped with enough biological payload to corrupt an entire planet. This is insane, Captain Martinez said over the comm. The commander of the Silent Watchers fleet looked older than David, worn down by centuries of watching for this moment. Commander, you trained for 800 years to survive. Don't throw it away now. I trained to protect people, David corrected. That's what I'm doing. The journey to the world ship took 4 hours. They flew through a battlefield that had consumed hundreds of ships, dodging architect fighters that moved with increasing coordination. David piloted with skills Xylara had never seen, his hands steady on controls, his voice calm as he navigated through impossible spaces. You're an excellent pilot, she observed. I had good teachers. He glanced at her, and for just a moment the gentleness returned to his eyes. If we don't make it back, we will. But if we don't, I want you to know that these 3 years with you were the best of my life. All 800 years of it. 800? Xylara's mind struggled with the number. The journals only covered, I'm older than I look. Biological stasis, slow-time vaults, suspended animation during the long watch. I was born in 2287 Earth calendar. I'm not even sure how old that makes me anymore. He smiled sadly. Old enough to know that what we have is rare. Worth protecting. Worth dying for if necessary. The world ship loomed ahead, a mountain of pulsing flesh and twisted metal. Its surface crawled with activity, biomechanical constructions that built and rebuilt themselves constantly. David threaded their ship through defensive systems that would have destroyed anything larger, heading for a vulnerable point he'd identified in the structure. Ready? He asked the strike team. 10 Krathosian warriors roared their battle cry. Xylara drew her plasma blade, feeling its familiar weight. David reached under his seat and pulled out the sword she'd seen in his hidden room. Its blade seemed to drink light, and the characters inscribed along its length glowed softly. What does it say? Xylara asked. Peace is the goal, but war is the path. David's voice carried centuries of weariness. My grandfather gave it to me when I joined the defense forces. I haven't drawn it in 400 years. They breached the world ship's hull in an explosion of force and fire. The interior was worse than nightmares. Organic corridors that breathed, walls that bled, and architect drones that emerged from the flesh like antibodies responding to infection. The battle was brutal. Krathosian warriors fought with savage efficiency, but the architects kept coming, adapting to each tactic within minutes. David moved through them like death itself, his sword cutting through biomechanical armor with impossible ease. Xylara fought beside him, and in that chaos, she finally understood. This was who David Chen truly was, not gardener or warrior, but both. He killed with terrible efficiency, but each death seemed to pain him. He never wasted emotion, never struck in anger, never lost control. This was precision born of practice and sorrow. They fought deeper into the world ship, following David's mental map of architect biology. The payload grew heavier with each step, but they couldn't stop. Behind them, the entrance sealed, cutting off retreat. This really was a one-way mission. Finally, they reached the core, a massive chamber where the world ship's intelligence resided. It was beautiful in a horrific way, a fusion of brain tissue and computational matrices, pulsing with thought patterns visible as bioluminescent waves. Set the charges, David ordered. We have 2 minutes before they adapt to our presence and neutralize the payload. As the team worked, something unexpected happened. The world ship's intelligence spoke, not in words but in images broadcast directly to their neural implants. Xylara gasped as understanding flooded her mind. The architects weren't invaders. They were refugees. David, wait! She grabbed his arm. They're running from something. Something worse. Something that destroyed their original galaxy and has been hunting them for millions of years. The intelligence showed them. Darkness between darkness. A force that didn't consume or conquer but simply erased. Entire galaxies winked out of existence where it passed. The architects had fled for eons, consuming resources desperately to stay ahead of the void, building themselves into weapons because that was the only way to survive. David stood frozen, his sword still raised, his finger on the detonator. Xylara watched emotions war across his face. Duty, compassion, terrible understanding. They're not evil, he whispered. They're terrified. Commander, the charges are set, one of the Crithosian warriors reported. 30 seconds to detonation. The world ship's intelligence pulsed again, and this time the message was clear. We did not want this. We are sorry, but we must survive. Please understand. We must survive. Xylara felt tears streaming down her face. How many times had humans said the same thing? How many times had her own people justified conquest with the same desperate logic? Survival was the oldest law, the deepest instinct. Who was she to judge? But David was already moving. Instead of activating the detonator, he was interfacing with the payload, his fingers flying across the control panel with desperate speed. What are you doing? General Vex demanded over the comm. Changing the plan, David said. His voice carried an edge of manic inspiration. 800 years ago, we made them dormant. We didn't kill them because we couldn't. They're too distributed, too adaptive. But what if we don't need to kill them? What if we can communicate? Commander, that's insane, Captain Martinez cut in. The architects don't negotiate. They're barely sentient. Wrong. David's hands never stopped moving. They're incredibly sentient. They're just so traumatized that all they can think about is survival. I know that feeling. I lived it for centuries. He looked at Xylara. I'm reprogramming the payload. Instead of a virus that kills, we're creating a bridge, a way for them to communicate with us, to ask for help instead of taking it. And if it doesn't work? Tharn asked. If they just adapt and kill us anyway? David's smile was sad. Then we're exactly where we started, and I've wasted our one chance. But I have to try, because if I don't, I'm still the man who creates death. And I want to be more than that. The world ship's intelligence seemed to sense the change. The aggressive defenses around them withdrew slightly. Architect drones stopped attacking, standing motionless in the pulsing corridors. Waiting. Xylara, David said quietly, I need your neural crown. Crithosian telepathy might be the bridge we need. If I can combine it with the payload, create a shared language. She didn't hesitate. She removed the crown, feeling suddenly vulnerable without its weight. David took it carefully, reverently, and began integrating it with the modified payload. This is going to hurt, he warned, for all of us. I'm essentially creating a forced telepathic link between 3 different forms of consciousness: human, Crithosian, and architect. Our minds weren't designed to touch like this. Do it, Xylara said. David activated the device. Pain exploded through Xylara's consciousness. Her mind suddenly touched thousands of others. Millions of others. She felt the architect's terror, their endless flight, their desperate hunger, but she also felt their memories of home, of a galaxy where they had been peaceful, before the void came, before survival became their only thought. She felt David too, and the depth of his pain nearly broke her. 800 years of war, of sacrifice, of watching people he loved die while he survived. The crushing guilt of being good at killing. The desperate hope that maybe this time he could save something instead of destroying it. And woven through it all, she felt his love for her. Bright and fierce, and the only thing that had kept him human through centuries of darkness. The world ship's intelligence recoiled at first, overwhelmed by the sudden connection. Then slowly it began to understand. Communication, not consumption, understanding, not instinct. Images flowed between them. Xylara showed the architects the Crithosian Empire, not as territory to consume but as a civilization with art, philosophy, families who loved each other. David showed them Earth, how humanity had survived its own extinction and chosen mercy over revenge. He showed them his gardens, the small growing things that represented hope, and the architects hesitantly showed them their pain. The void that had taken everything they loved. The millions of years of running. The slow erosion of their identity until all that remained was hunger and fear. "Help us," the intelligence finally communicated, and the words carried such desperate vulnerability that Xylara sobbed. "We are lost. We do not want to be monsters. But we have forgotten how to be anything else." David's response carried all the weight of his own journey. "I understand. And I can help. But you have to stop. You have to trust us." Time seemed suspended. The world ship's entire consciousness wrestled with the concept. Trust had been abandoned so long ago. Could it be reclaimed? Then, like a dam breaking, the decision came. The world ship began to change. Aggressive systems powered down. Attack drones retreated. The entire architect fleet, thousands of ships strong, went dormant. In the war room on Kyrix Prime, alarms suddenly silenced. "They've stopped," Admiral Kess reported, disbelief in her voice. "All architect forces have ceased combat operations and are withdrawing to defensive formations." Emperor Kryn stared at the displays. "What did he do?" Through the neural link, David addressed not just the world ship but every architect consciousness in the fleet. His words carried through the telepathic bridge, translated by Krathosian neural technology into something both species could understand. "I am Commander David Chen of Earth. 800 years ago, my people faced extinction. We survived by becoming monsters and it nearly destroyed us. I know what you're running from. I know why you consume. And I'm telling you that there's another way." He paused and Xylara felt him gathering strength for what came next. "The void you're fleeing, it's a natural phenomenon. A wave of dark energy that sweeps through the universe every few million years. My people have studied it. We can't stop it, but we can predict it, and we can prepare." The world ship's intelligence seized on this information with desperate hope. "You can help us survive without consuming?" "Yes, but it requires cooperation. You'll need to integrate with the galactic civilizations you've been attacking. Share your technology, your knowledge. In return, we'll help you find sustainable resources. We'll teach you how to grow instead of just take." Grow? The concept was alien to them, fascinating and terrifying. "Grow," David confirmed. And then he did something that made Xylara's heart swell with love. He shared with them his memories of gardening. The patience required. The careful attention to small things. The joy of watching seeds become plants. You can be builders again, not just consumers. But you have to choose it. The world ship was silent for a long moment. Then Xylara felt something shift in the collective consciousness. Not all of the architects agreed. There were factions that wanted to continue consuming. Voices that argued survival trumped morality. But the central intelligence, the core of their being, made its choice. "We will try. Teach us how to grow." The tension broke. David sagged against Xylara, the telepathic link releasing them. Around them, the Krathosian warriors stood stunned, having witnessed something unprecedented. An extinction-level threat, choosing peace. "Strike team, this is Admiral Kess. What is your status?" David straightened with effort. "Mission successful, Admiral. But not in the way anyone expected. We're coming home." The journey back through the world ship was surreal. Architect drones that had attacked them now stepped aside, their postures somehow communicating respect. When they reached their ship, they found it repaired, refueled, and surrounded by an honor guard of architect fighters. As they flew back to Kyrix Prime, David slumped in the pilot seat, exhausted beyond measure. Xylara took the controls, guiding them home while her husband rested. "You did it," she said softly. "You saved everyone." "We did it," he corrected. "Your neural crown made the bridge possible. Your willingness to understand made them willing to be understood." He opened one eye to look at her. "Besides, I just did what gardeners do. Found something struggling to survive and gave it what it needed to grow properly." "You're impossible," she said, but she was smiling. "You married me anyway." "I did, and I'd do it again." The reception on Kyrix Prime was unprecedented. The Krathosian Empire, along with a dozen other civilizations that had been preparing for extinction, celebrated the most unlikely peace in galactic history. David found himself besieged by scientists, philosophers, and military leaders, all demanding to know how he'd accomplished the impossible. But he deflected credit at every opportunity. insisting it was collaboration, not heroism, that had saved them. When the formal ceremonies ended, he disappeared into his gardens, needing the quiet and the growing things to heal from what he'd endured. Scylla found him there 3 days later, hands deep in soil, surrounded by seedlings. "They're calling you the peacemaker," she said, "the human who talked down the architects." "I'd rather be called a gardener," he replied. "Less pressure." She knelt beside him, heedless of the dirt on her ceremonial robes. "The Emperor wants to know if you'll help establish communication protocols between the architects and the other civilizations. They're talking about creating entire star systems dedicated to sustainable resource cultivation, teaching the architects to build instead of consume. That'll take decades," David said. "Maybe centuries. Good thing humans live a long time then." She took his hand. "You don't have to do it alone, though. I'm with you, for however long it takes." He looked at her with eyes that held centuries of pain and hope. "Even knowing what I am, what I've done, especially knowing that." She leaned in close. "You're the man who turned extinction into alliance, who saw monsters and recognized people in pain, who chose the hard path of mercy over the easy path of destruction. That's who you are, David Chen, gardener and guardian, poet and warrior. My husband, I love you," he said simply. "I know. I read it in your journals." She smiled at his surprised expression. "And I love you too. All of you. The gentle part and the terrible part. The man who plants flowers and the man who carries that sword. Because they're not separate. They're just you." In orbit above Chirix Prime, the Architect world ship had settled into a stable position. Its aggressive systems remained dormant, converted instead into receiving stations where human and Crethosian agricultural specialists were beginning to teach sustainable cultivation methods. It would be a long process, but for the first time in millions of years, the architects were learning to grow food instead of taking it. Captain Martinez visited the gardens a week later, finding David pruning roses while Xylara practiced nearby with her plasma blade. "Interesting retirement," Martinez observed. "Most of us just take up fishing." "I tried fishing," David replied. "Turns out I'm terrible at it. Plants don't swim away when you're not looking." Martinez sat on a garden bench looking older than his years. "The Terra Defense Council wants to know if you're coming back. There are other threats out there, other missions that need someone with your particular skills." David set down his pruning shears. No, I did my time, Martinez. 800 years of it. I saved the galaxy once. Someone else can have the next turn. And if something comes that only you can stop?" David looked at Xylara, then back at the captain. "Then I'll deal with it when it comes. But I'm not going looking for wars anymore. I'm done being Commander Chen. I'm just David now. David the gardener who happens to have a really impressive wife and a past he's trying to grow beyond." Martinez stood, a small smile on his weathered face. "Fair enough. But for what it's worth, Commander, David, you showed us something important. That the warriors who know how to make peace are the ones who've seen the cost of war. That mercy isn't weakness, it's strength." After Martinez left, Xylara came to stand beside her husband. "Do you regret it? Giving up your command, your fleet, your military career?" David looked around at his garden, at the alien flowers growing beside earth roses, at the small trees that would outlive them both. "I spent 800 years preparing for war. I think I can spend the next 800 years growing peace. Besides," he pulled her close, "I have everything I need right here." "Flatterer," she said, but she melted into his embrace. "Honest gardener," he corrected. And so, in a garden on an alien world, under purple skies that had so recently faced extinction, two people who had learned the cost of survival built something new. Not a marriage of convenience or a political alliance, but a genuine partnership between someone who understood the price of war and someone who understood the value of peace. The galaxy had learned an important lesson. That sometimes the most dangerous warriors were the ones who chose not to fight. That mercy was a weapon more powerful than any virus or bomb. That the person tending roses might also be the one who saved the world. And in the quiet moments between diplomatic meetings and agricultural consultations, when David and Xylara walked through gardens that now grew on a dozen worlds, they carried with them the knowledge that they had chosen each other, known each other's darkness, and loved each other anyway. Comment for next.